Caput aprite vero, redens lares Domino. Caput aprite vero, redens lares Domino.
Welcome to the Meatsmith podcast. I'm Brandon Sheard, sometimes called the Farmstead Meatsmith. And this is the podcast wherein we talk about all the things, especially the humble and delightful adornment of the family table. I wanted to read you a quote that is really delicious. But before I do that, I need to remember to mention that we have classes posted for the advancement of the art of salubrious eating, specifically beginning with the killing of pigs, because every recipe for pork chops starts with a living pig. Every bacon curing methodology starts with a bullet for the beloved backyard swine. And so that is what we do in a Meatsmith class. We start with living pigs, and we take them all the way through the treatment of harvesting in a hands-on fashion. So it is not a demo where you watch me sort of flick a knife around and make pork chops magically appear from a carcass. Nope, I pull the trigger, and then I put knives in everybody else's hands, for better or worse. And pretty much in the 15 years we've been doing these classes, always for the better. Never had a problem. It's a lot of fun, and we have a class coming up in April, a pig class that is actually beginning to fill. So check that out on Farmstead Meatsmith. We just sold a ticket recently. The spaces are dwindling, and it's going to be a 3-day class where we harvest 2 pigs that are outside currently, munching away in benevolent confinement. I've got them in my barn instead of in the woods because they are, the woods don't have anything for them this time of year. The acorns have been cleaned up, and so they are pretty much in deep bedding in wood chips, eating organic, locally produced hog mash. And it is creating some very delicious and happy pigs. So that is coming up in April. I believe that is the 16th, 17th, and 18th in April. So I should probably, confirm such things as dates. So check that out. Yes, that's it. And that will be a great opportunity. Also check out the Farmstead Meatsmith membership, wherein we go deeper into the harvest by sharing experiences with Meatsmith members all over the country. And I routinely upload educational and instructional films on the harvesting of all manner of livestock, not just pigs. And there's over 70 there now, and you can find those and equip the family kitchen. Because really farming it's a culinary act. Farming is a domestic art. It is a thing that serves the family kitchen. It is the realm of the sagacious housewife. And all of our food acquisition used to be on the order of the domestic labor force, on the order of the family, because that was the final end, to enrich the family. One of the fun things that we're going to do on the at the family pig class is we're going to use a new tool. Now, I'm like a hobbit. I hope. I aspire to hobbitude. And I have a deep suspicion for all machines, sometimes not very rational, but no less deep. I find them bland, insulting, and boring, quite frankly. They commit thievery. They rob me of the ability to acquire a skill. So one of the things I have stubbornly done as a butcher for my family and as a profession is I have clung tenaciously to my cleaver. I have clung to an archaic technology, an old tool that people don't use anymore. And even when they do use it, they don't use it properly. Instead of going to the meat saw, which you will see as more or less an emblem of every butcher shop, right? The band saw, which you can very quickly use to cut up an animal in moments. I mean, a sheep, you can do it in seconds with a bandsaw. And you basically run the sheep through the carcass through the bandsaw, cutting indiscriminately bones and flesh with the same shredding saw teeth. Now, you can develop a certain adeptness at the use of a bandsaw, but let us not call it a skill. Yes, you can get pretty fast at it, and it is impressive. And I duly honor the guys that can take a lamb carcass and in literally 12 seconds, run it through the bandsaw and get that entire carcass cut up. It's very rapid. I dare say, though, that it doesn't take very long to acquire that particular adeptness. But if you want a skill, then you have to do this crazy thing where you deny yourself. You actually sacrifice the convenience and the speed of the bandsaw, and you put it aside and you take up the cleaver. And when you take up the cleaver, you use it to make your chops, and you use it properly to make your chops. And that means you never swing a cleaver into leg bones or ribs or any bone that would splinter. A cleaver is designed as a tool, which means that it is refined in its use, not general, right? It is specific because it is a work of art. It's a tool that is artful. And its specific use, its targeted use, is the fibrous bone of the spine and the sternum, because those bones don't splinter. And so you can use the cleaver to artfully make your chops. And when you do, I would say that you miss out even further on developing the skill of chopping your chops if you use a mallet. And you will see this sometimes. It is easier. It's easier, where you just rest the cleaver on your targeted vertebra, and then you pound it with a mallet, thus eliminating the variable of accuracy. Because without the mallet, you would have to lift and swing the cleaver, aiming it dexterously where you want it to go, so that you don't mangle the precious chops of pork or beef or lamb or whatever creature you have. And so I would encourage you to eschew the mallet as well. Take up the cleaver and learn to swing it. And this means that you will err. Just keep your fingers out of the erring strokes. Keep them at a good distance away. But really the technique with the cleaver is it's very simple, and everyone can do it, but the degree of expertise that you can develop in wielding your cleaver is seemingly limitless. That's, I think, one of the characteristics of a tool that is worth your time and worth your use. In its use, you develop a skill, not just a shallow competency. You develop a skill which is quivering on the borders of art, quivering on the boundaries of sleight of hand magic. This is what a good tool affords you. Think about it. When you see someone frame a house, and I've seen this, right? It's impressive when you get a very experienced framer, especially when they don't really need to follow plans, and they can lay out like a spiral staircase just on the ground and then knock it together in half a day. It's incredible. There are people out there that can do this. Nothing but a worm drive saw. And it is wonderful to watch them do this with a pneumatic nail gun. And yes, you can be amazingly competent at wielding your nail gun, right? Very quick. Pop, 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 pop. Things brought together and joined rapidly, right? That has an appeal to it. But have you ever seen someone do it with a hammer? That is a thing of beauty. That transcends the competency of wielding a nail gun. It's pretty amazing. And you really don't quite know the degree of skill involved until you try some of it yourself, right? And especially for the novice hammer swinger, right? If you've never done it, remember when you were 12 learning how to swing a hammer and how many times you bent the nail? Then you'd start to get a taste of how deeply gratifying, how almost sublime it is when you see an experienced builder sink a nail with 2 swings. And the first swing's just a set, right? He just sets the nail and then boom, with one big, waffled framing hammer, he can sink that entire 16-penny nail into the wood, into the 2x6. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. And I find that when you watch someone do something really good with a simple tool, we could say a primitive tool, but that is, I don't like that word. I think it's silly. With a simple tool that is pure, it looks like sleight of hand, because what you're witnessing is more than one consequence to one act. Do you know what I mean by this? I've probably thought too much about this, but when you see someone artfully using a tool, you can have, an idea in your mind of the goal for that particular movement, that particular use. But when someone is really good, when they have the admirable skill of using that tool, they get about 4 or 5 results from a single movement, which is why it is technically, it looks like sleight of hand. Meat is falling from the knife on an artfully butchered carcass in ways that kind of surprise you. You're a little surprised that such a subtle movement of the knife, such a small movement, can have so much effect. That is art. And that, I think, is what differentiates mere competency or even speed from skill. And it's so in our nature to wield tools this way, to wield tools in a way that is equal parts effective, so it achieves the desired utilitarian end, and winsome. It's downright poetic, people. Come on. Especially when the tool is simple and well made. So I think about this, man, it's kind of weird that I think about this, but you look at the other creatures, right? They have senses, just to state the most obvious thing in the universe. But they all have a dominant sense. You can pretty much categorize God's sensible creatures many ways, by many taxonomies, which we might impose upon them. And it is not an artificial imposition. I think, no, actually, it is what they are. And it is, more importantly, what we are as humans, as descendants of Adam, who was tasked to name the animals. It is in our nature to taxonomize, to name them in accord with their nature. That is a distinctly admirable terrestrial human thing to do. And so one of the ways you could do this is by senses. Think about this. The senses. Each creature has a dominant sense, right? That really dominates the way that even that creature looks, and especially how it acts. The sense that it uses mostly to sustain its body, to acquire the goods that sustain its life. And, obviously you can look at the canine, the dog, and we know now something like, 99.9% of its brain is occupied and dominated by the sense of smell. Because a dog can smell things that are extremely far away, and it can retain smells that are very old and extremely subtle. Smell. And then you look at the way the dog is built, right? Nose is way out in the front, guiding the whole creature, everywhere it goes. That is its dominant guiding principle, is aroma. And then look at some other creatures, like a lot of the prey animals, right? You look at sheep. What's their dominant sense? They can smell pretty good. It's not sensitivity to touch, because a hided animal, actually, shockingly, can actually get quite enormous lacerations in their hide. And shockingly, they don't feel it so much. And it's because they don't have skin, unlike a pig, which is full of nerve endings and very sensitive to touch. So it's definitely not touch on sheep. But you look at their eyeballs. Look at where they're set. Those are the most prominent physical feature of those creatures, and it gives them almost complete 360 vision, right? So that they can spot predators, even while their head is down and grazing. Eagles, of course, their dominant sense is sight, and owls, or maybe, owls, it might be auditory. But you can go through all the creatures. Now, one weird one, okay, is the raccoon. Raccoons, I'm sure, at least I have noticed, because I think too much about this, they move differently than every single creature. They do not move prompted by sight or smell. It's weird. They move weirdly. They are not drawn by aromas or by visuals so much. And consequently, the way that they ambulate, the way that they move is weird. And I've wondered, what is weird about this? And you know what? You know what it is? It's humanoid. That's what's weird about raccoons. It's humanoid. They move like humans in a weird way. And you think, no, they don't. What are you talking about? They go bipedal sometimes, but most of the time they're on all fours. But just look at the way they move. They move like humans. It's very odd, little humanoids. And the reason is because of what their dominant sense is. The dominant sense of raccoons. Think about it. What are they leading with? What is drawing them to whatever bodily good they seek? It's their hands. It's their sense of touch. They are literally pulling themselves forward on the ground. The thing that leads their stride, it's not their snout, it's not their nose or their eyes. They reach out. That's why they have such long front legs. They have such long forearms. They reach out in front of them for every step, and they feel the ground. And that is what conveys information to them. That's why, not incidentally on a farming podcast, I guess, they can reach through your chicken wire and rip your chickens apart. Because they are dexterous. They have dexterity. And that is where their information is. That's where it's coming from, their sense of touch. And why would that be humanoid? Because I would argue that, well, even St. Thomas says it, in a way, if we were to rank the senses of the human being, we can definitely do it from highest to lowest. The highest is definitely the sight, right? Is eyesight. But the sense that gives the most information, the most detailed information, is touch, our ability to touch. And I know this because I can feel differences that I cannot see, right? I can feel more information with such subtle information with my hands. And St. Thomas calls them the organ of organs. They execute the province of our reason with a particular precision that is totally unique to us. Our sense of touch is extraordinarily dominant and powerful. Think about it. If you ever do woodworking, you know this. You make your you're sanding something, how do you tell when you have, how do you tell when you're sanding, when you do it gradually, right? Let's say you're doing finish work in your wood shop. You sand something 200 grit, and then maybe you take it to 600, and then you want to take it all the way to 800 or 1,000 and make it shine. How do you tell where you have already been with the 800 grit so that you know what else to sand? That's because you feel it. You touch it with your hand. You can't see it, but you can tell the difference by touch. And it's even so subtle that you couldn't draw a line visually where the 600 grit and the 800 grit starts, or even like the 600 and the 1,000 grit starts, where they differentiate. You probably couldn't even visualize a market with a line, but you can feel it because your hands are incredibly sensitive, incredibly sensitive. And so how beautiful is it? How natural is it to humans to have tools that fit the hand? And we sacrifice that sensitivity, that excellence of the manual instrument of the human hand when we put something in it that doesn't require dexterity, right? As much dexterity. Oh my goodness, that was ridiculous. That was a long excursus on using hand tools, but that's because I wanted to show you a hand tool. It was meant to be an introduction. I have a new hand tool right now, and it's pretty awesome. And just like, using the cleaver to make your chops, you get more artful chops and you gain the skill of wielding a cleaver. Whereas if you use the mallet or the bandsaw, guess what skill you never get to have? You never get to learn the sleight of hand of accurate, adept, delightful, propitious cleaver use. You never get it. You're going to live your whole life without that. And that's sad because it is a pleasure. It is a pleasure to use a hand tool. Well, it is delightful. And when something is delightful, it makes the action, makes the work easier to do, even though it's taking you longer. So one of the things that is tiresome when you are a butcher, speaking of work, is splitting carcasses, is cutting from tail to snout, cutting the entire carcass in half down the spine. That is usually done with a saw. I do it with a hand saw, not surprisingly, though they do make mechanical saws for this. And but I'm going to retire the manual saw for splitting because I have an even simpler tool that will elicit from me and simultaneously bequeath me with a skill. And that will be the skill of splitting a carcass with a hog splitter, with a giant cleaver. And so it is my joy to show you this beautiful work of art. This here is a hog splitter, artfully and beautifully crafted with a subtle fawn's foot handle here so that you can accommodate the ergonomics of the human hand, the excellent ergonomics of the human hand. And it's got a beautiful sheath on it. This was made by Farmstead. No relation other than we both find the word smith incredibly useful. This here was made by Farmstead in Indiana, I believe, artfully of high carbon steel. And it's heavy and it's long handled so you can grab it with two hands. And this is never something that you would use to create chops, though actually I dare say you could. But that's not what it's made for. It is oriented towards one specialized task, and that is the splitting from stem to stern, from front to back, the carcass right down the spine. That is what this is for. And it's even got a beautiful stamped logo on there of the state of Indiana. And the FS for Farmstead. So I would encourage you to check them out, because these gentlemen, these craftsmen, are creating tools for the farm artfully, and they have a really cool axe too that is just the right size. And it has a hardened pole, so you can, it's small enough to carry out to the woods to do your limbing and grubbing, but big enough to pound in wedges without opening and swelling the eye of the axe and loosening it from the handle. Anyway, it's a beautiful axe, wood-handled, of course, as all axes ought to be. But I'm really looking forward to using this. So this is a beautiful tool, a hand tool that we will use at the Family Pig class, April 16th, 17th, and 18th. That will be its maiden voyage through the vertebrae of a pig. And I'm very excited to do that. It will be great. Now, one of the cool things about this particular tool is it's actually the fastest way to split an animal. So usually we think we have to sacrifice time to go back to a simpler tool. And that is usually the case, and that is usually worthwhile. But in this case, that is not how it works. This is actually a much quicker way. When you get good at wielding this and staying in center, right, then you actually go through an entire spinal column far faster than you would with a handsaw or even a mechanized saw. It's very quick. It's surprisingly quick. So in this case, you're actually gaining a lot of time by going back to the simpler tool. It will be great. It's got a lot of concentration of weight towards the end of the cleaver, and you want this heavy weight because then you don't have to swing it with all your might. You can drop it artfully and intentionally. And dropping is a much simpler act than aiming. Aiming introduces more variables, specifically the variable of missing. But dropping, you can drop this cleaver, because it's heavy enough, through the spine of a pig or even a steer, and it will actually go through pretty darn quick and very accurately. So I'm really excited to use that. It will be a delight. It will be a pleasure to use that. And it makes me think about, the nature of a voluntarily adopted limitation. A limitation. I, by accident of my temperament, tend to adopt these limitations thoughtlessly, which is actually not good. You want to do it thoughtfully and intentionally. And I have done it in the butcher shop for long enough that I have started more intentionally analyzing my Luddite adoption of old tools and proven them in their functionality, their superior functionality, and most especially in the delight of use. They are a pleasure. They are a pleasure to use in the actual toil itself. What a misery it is to work against your primary tool, to be fighting it the whole time. It is of the species of that sin that cries out to heaven for vengeance that is described as denying a laborer his due wage, I think. It's somewhere in that species. To use a tool that does not serve you but fights you is a desolation devoutly to be avoided. It's wrong on a lot of deep levels. But it all starts, this pleasure, this delight of using the simpler, older tools, with a voluntary and artificially adopted limitation. Because we have no limitations right now, at least in our culture, in our context, in my context, there are no limits. The extremes of convenience and comfort that I can achieve in any given act and passivity are limitless. That horizon is limitless. I could probably have AI cut up a pig for me at this point. And so in our culture specifically, we require extraordinary intention, extraordinary self-imposed limitation. Limitations that used to just be normal. They used to just be part of the toil that is natural. The 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to, the struggle to survive and to eat. And in our context, it has become shockingly easy. But one of the things that makes this toil a little more endurable is this thing called pleasure. And I think about it because I really like the pleasure of the table. One of my most enjoyable reads is this book right here. And it's not, it kind of purports itself as a philosophical text, but this guy he's a little squeaky on his philosophy. So I don't recommend it 100% unreservedly, but I do recommend it actually 100% that you read it because it's a lot of fun. But it's called The Physiology of Taste. The Physiology of Taste by a Catholic, by Brillat-Savarin. And I don't know how to pronounce that at all. I only pretend to pronounce French. He writes about pleasure. And that's, in a way, this is about gourmandism, being a gourmand. Or as we might say today, a foodie, which is not a word that is precise enough to make it worthy of use. But gourmandism is what he was writing about. And so he's really writing about the pleasures of the table in this entire volume. That's his whole exploration. And it's very interesting. He's got lots of aphorisms that start this, and he gets at pleasure. What is the function of pleasure, and what does it have to do with using old tools, with eating well, and with agriculture? What on earth? How does it play into the toil of feeding yourself, and why would you go to the trouble to take delight in your food? You know, there's actually a secular argument for this, and I think it's actually wrong. It will, and I've probably articulated this in the past myself, until I lived a little more. And it's the idea that it is not worthy of the sacrifice of the animal. It's poor thanks to the pig, right? To cut up a chop, with your cleaver artfully, and then burn it and not cook it well and make it insipid and not taste nice. Poor gratitude, bad gratitude to the pig. And I think that's actually an error. That's a philosophical error. It's, if anything, it could be conceived as ingratitude to the Creator that gave you the pig and ordered it towards your delicious dinner. Certainly towards your family, whom you are tasked to feed. But I think there's another way to think of pleasure. And I think it's also not really possible to honor, in the technical sense, a pig. To honor a being that is lower on the order of being than you are. Now, let me tell you what that does not mean. That does not mean that we despise the pig and we look down upon it. No, it means we see it for what it is. It would actually be, if it is possible to dishonor a pig, it would be to elevate it to the status of men, because that is contrary to what it is. That's not what a pig is. It has a nobility unique to its own nature. And we err if we degrade it or elevate it. And we do it in the same way. We degrade its actual nature. And so I don't think you can actually honor a pig. you can have due respect for the way it was put together and raise it accordingly. And I think you can even have affection for your pig, because that is part of what matriculates them into the mystical body of your farm, of which you are the head. And so affection is properly ordered, but it becomes straight up malice if you don't know what the pig is. Then how can you love it? You don't have affection for it. Then you do crazy things. In the name of loving the pig, you create a animal rescue, and you retain animals that are ordained to the noble end of feeding people with their flesh, and you prevent them from doing that. And they die of disease and old age, pumped full of pharmaceuticals, in unimaginable pain, by the way. I don't care how much painkillers you give them. And they usually don't, because animals tend to just endure pain without much, complaint. That is contrary to the pig's nature. That is not good. That's crazy. That is misguided affection. That is actually malice for the pig, because you're not loving the pig for what it is. You are devouring it without devouring it. Okay, but that's not what I was going to say. What I was going to say was, where then does pleasure come in? He's got this great line in here in the Physiology of Taste. He says, the Creator, while forcing men to eat in order to live, tempts them to do so with appetite, and then rewards him with pleasure. Now, of course, he's taking poetic license here. Okay, so we're not going to take this as a theological statement. But it is a fact that, just like our hands that can detect the subtle shift in texture between a 800 and 900 grit sanded surface of pine, your tongue is capable of incredible subtlety, incredible taste, truly remarkable. And that comes from our Creator. He rewards us with pleasure when we eat. And then he says, good living is an act of intelligence by which we choose things which have an agreeable taste rather than those which do not. That is an act of intelligence. That is an act that is particular to an intellectual being, that have an agreeable taste, that taste delicious. This is something that animals don't do. We might call it delicious, but really what they're doing is reacting to avoid those things that they by instinct know would be harmful, and to devour those things that they know by instinctual code is good for them, is salubrious, and sustains the body. And I think really this is where the rubber meets the road with small farming and homesteading. If you're going to do this, it has to taste good. And that's not because, you are a foodie and this is all about foodieism and some amazing gourmand exploit of being able to brag about growing your own vegetables and how fine your tomatoes are compared to the grocery stores. What I mean is, technically, we should farm because it tastes good. It tastes well. Now, that is the proximate end of farming. The remote end, which is more essential and really is the final end, the final cause, the real purpose, is to nourish our bodies so that we can sustain the body in a virtuous manner and go to heaven. That's what farming is really for. That's the final cause. But that is toil. That involves work. That involves struggle and trial. And anybody with a large family with a lot of small children knows that feeding them all is not a small amount of work. And so providence has given you something to help you, and that is pleasure. Pleasure is a means. It is a means, to quote, I think, Father Ripperger on this. It is a means to execute an action well. It's not an end in itself, but it's a means to execute an action well. And so while it's not the final cause, you can use it as a momentary guide for your actions. That means if you cook up a dinner and it is le gros, it does not taste nice, then you did not execute that action well. What needed to happen there is that the pleasure of taste did actually need to be your guide. It should taste good. That's the immediate end, like right there, right in front of you. This should taste good. This should taste well. And if you do that, it will make the act of growing food and cooking it and the considerable toil of harvesting your own pigs and cows, that is a fit reason. It will make it easier to do that toil. To say that this tastes well, that's why I do it. That is altogether fitting and proper. I think that the technical definition of pleasure, which is really helpful, I don't know if you find this helpful. I find it helpful. Father Ripperger says that it's a supervening good which accompanies a well-disposed faculty towards a good object. So supervening, like think about what that means. And I think what it means, it's a supervening good, pleasure is, or delight, that accompanies a well-disposed faculty. It can't be the end in itself. It's not the final end, right, of your eating. A supervening good, so delight, pleasure is a good, contrary to the Puritans. It is a good, which accompanies a well-disposed faculty towards a good object. So supervening, and what, without knowing any moral theology myself, what I think that word actually means, vening, it comes over, it flies over, it comes over, super, over, right, above. It attends. It's not the thing itself. It's not the center of it. It attends. It comes with vening, like venire, to come, maybe. I don't know. We're just speculating on moral theology at this point, but I don't think my etymology is that far off. It's a supervening good. So it comes with the good. It attends it. It's a good that attends the act. It's not the point of the act of cooking and raising your pigs, but it attends it. It's delightful. The use of your cleaver with its well-oiled handle and the stained blade inscribed with the narrative of your omnivory and your skilled use of it and the flavor of a braised shank from a cow that you grew on your grass and slaughtered and butchered well and then cooked deliciously. Those are supervening goods. They attend the act, the culinary act of farming and cooking. So it's literally the icing on the cake. It's not the cake, but it attends the good act. It is literally the icing on the cake. That's what pleasure at the table is. Pleasure in culinary creations. It's a supervening good. St. Thomas says that it is a thing that once apprehended, so a sensible beast, you have to have an intellect, so not a sensible beast, but even higher, an intellect to experience this. When you are aware that you have apprehended or attained a good that confirms you in your nature, that accords with your nature, like what's our nature? Well, we know by our acts, we have a bajillion sensory organs on our tongue. We can taste everything, okay? It's part of our nature. So it is when we attain a good that registers, that is, and we sense it, and it confirms us in our nature, that sense, that act of awareness of that good, having been attained, that establishes us in our nature. That is pleasure. That is what delight is. The sense, the awareness of it. the experience of that fitting good is pleasure. And I would say that you can have this even in the midst of penury, of need, of poverty, of simplicity. In fact, I would say that the well-off kitchen, the well-off frugality of the family kitchen, is technically a poor kitchen. It has fewness and truth, unlike Polonius, unlike Ophelia's father. It is pure, has fewness of ingredients. And I find, and I'm sure you have found, that at no time do I exhibit greater culinary creativity than when the kitchen is relatively empty and I have like 3 unrelated, weird, but quality ingredients. That is where culinary art arises, because it taxes your creativity and you apply your reason to treat your food artfully to make it taste well, which is a worthy end of your efforts. A proximate end, not the final end. Can't just eat for pleasure. And this is why I think it is not accidental that the thing that moderates this, the thing that the virtue that moderates all of our culinary efforts and tool usage, actually, is temperance. Temperance is the virtue by which we moderate the pleasures related to touch. And since we have to touch our food to eat it, taste is a matter of temperance. And I was just reading that temperance has parts. It has many parts, but it also has integral parts. Integral parts of temperance. And these are very interesting. These are ones that you can inculcate. These are like the, sort of like the, I hate the primitive adjective again, but these are like the primordial movements that become the guardians of a particular virtue. So they're particularly good to encourage them in your children as they are forming themselves. In these primordial movements that can start to look like temperance, and that can eventually be the guardians, the protectors of temperance, are 2. These are the integral parts of temperance. One of them is shame. Isn't that interesting? Shame is a guardian of temperance, protector of temperance, and a relish or a desire or, a love of that which is fitting, which I think the moralists called honestia or honestas. A love for what is fitting, for what is proper. These are actually the guardians of temperance. So temperance is obviously not just go eat dirt, right? Starve yourself to death, or totally deny yourself all pleasures of touch and only experience pain. Now, you might do this for penance, and that might be admirable to a degree, but the defect of temperance, what is it? It could be, one of them could be frigidity. You're too cold. But that's probably more of a defect of mirth or joy. But anyway, temperance, the guardian of temperance, implies that you are going to have a sense, a desire for what is fitting. And it is definitely unfitting for a man, for a human to eat like a pig. Hence, the wealth of metaphors pertaining to gluttons who eat like pigs, right? We know that that is not fitting. And so part of temperance is actually cultivating, it's not really a virtue, but it is a movement, a propensity for that, a desire, an inclination towards that which is fitting, that which is proper. And it is fitting that your wine should pair with your meal. It is fitting that it should taste well. That is fitting. Contrary-wise, no, not contrary, obversely, on the other side of it, shame, shamefacedness. This is actually a praiseworthy shame that is guardian of temperance. It is that shame wherein a person would suddenly become aware that they are eating like a pig. Food is falling out of your mouth. You are eating something gross. This is why do we feel shame about admitting that we have darkened the golden arches and eaten something from McDonald's? We feel shame. Some of us do. Some of us don't. In which case, I would say it might be a little more difficult to maintain temperance. But this shame, this praiseworthy shame, can help you be and develop a natural repugnance to acting in an unbecoming way, to eating like a pig. And unbecoming meaning like contrary to your being. You're slipping down. You're acting in a way that is lower on the hierarchy of being than what is proper to you. Honestas and shamefacedness, parts of temperance. And I would say that nowhere does, this is the beautiful paradox of traditional cookery and peasant life and simple domestic scale farming, untrammeled, and as it is in my imagination, is that it is in equal parts thrift and extravagance. In equal parts. And I'll tell you what I mean. This is part of what intentionally adopting the limits, having to actually fabricate and manufacture them by choosing, contrary to what is readily available and easy, choosing not to go to the store. And sometimes it just takes poverty to not be able to do that. And that is when you eat very well. And in our case, for example, I have found that bone broth, stock, is the ultimate antidote to unbecoming food. You have to make bone broth. Please, I entreat you, make bone broth. It is what takes fewness of ingredients and turns them into a meal. I'm going to give you an example of this because this has been happening to us recently. The pantry is empty, quite empty. But what I do have is broth because we make it in magnificent quantities. We have so much bone broth. And I'll describe a simple bone broth recipe because it is an icon of this well-off frugality, this temperate feasting of the family scale. And I would say that that is this pleasure of the family table that is simultaneously not excessive and extraordinarily delicious. This is because our Creator is benevolent. Stock, bone broth. I recently had only a handful of arugula that was actually gifted from one of our neighbors. About 10 little eggplants and an enormous knob of ginger. That's it. And then I had, no garlic. We didn't have anything. Very sparse. Just happened to be a very sparse kitchen day. And, but I did also have lots of broth. I had bone broth. And all you have to do is fry the arugula, the eggplant, and the ginger in a pan. Dice them up kind of small. Peel the ginger and do a lot of ginger. Go ahead. All you have is eggplant. Doesn't taste like much, right? And chop up the arugula. Fried it all hot and fast in a little bit of pig lard. And quick salting towards the end. And then I poured in probably, a quart of stock. And let it, and then turned up the heat in a frying pan so that it reduced substantially and relatively quickly. I had to get started on this kind of early. And that expanded and enhanced these mere vegetables substantially. I was able to feed my whole family with this because I also made another thing that is blessed and transfigured by the addition of broth, and that is rice. Except when you do this with rice, it becomes risotto. So rice is incredibly cheap. If you can get arborio short-grained rice, it works best with that. But you melt some butter in a pan, and then if you have an onion, saute an onion in that butter, sweat it. Don't totally caramelize it. You're just sweating it so it gets transparent. Dice it, sweat it in that butter, and then stir in a random quantity of arborio rice until each little kernel becomes slightly transparent. It will become transparent as it just warms in the melted butter. And then ladle in a ladleful at a time while you're stirring, a ladleful of broth that is simmering away. So I frequently make this when we're already making broth. And I'll use broth and bone stock interchangeably here. But we already have a pot on the counter going anyway, so I'll just pull from that. And you add a ladle at a time, stirring. And don't add another ladle until you see most of the prior ladle has been absorbed by the rice. And in this way, I mean, think about the transformation that you're doing here. You're taking this starchy, this carb rice, pretty, as a father of 10, I can tell you there's not much going on with rice. Like it just, kids need more than that. But stir in bone broth, and suddenly every kernel of rice, as you coax, as you nurse the broth into every single grain of rice over judicious and patient stirring, you turn the entire thing into like a half gallon of broth suspended in now delicious and not bland rice kernels. It's absolutely delicious, and it's incredibly rich. It's a meal in itself. This is why you can eat risotto and almost nothing else, because it's actually got a ton of protein. It's absorbed and locked up all of that protein from the broth, all that collagen, which is a protein, in the starch. And it's beautiful and it's delicious. And so do melt the butter in the pan, dice the onion, let it sweat, and then stir in the rice until it becomes transparent. And then give it a splash of a dry white wine or a red wine, whatever you want, a dry one. I like dry wines in risotto. Maybe a gluggity glug. Let's not say splash. You want a solid gluggity glug, and then stir it around. And when you see that wine is pretty much absorbed, then start ladling in the rice. Ladling in the broth. And then when it just can't take anymore, it will expand in volume by 3 times. Solidly. So account for that when in your pan, when you put in the dry rice at the beginning. And yeah, you might be there for 40 minutes stirring. Now you can go and come back, just keep it moving, and don't add another ladle until the previous ladle has been absorbed. So you're slowly introducing rice to broth. And it will expand and actually be a full meal. And this was our family meal. We fed 12 of us with this, with some random eggplant saucy reduction, because after it had simmered in the broth for a little while, that broth had reduced and just become absolutely unctuous, thickened substantially. No flour to make it bland and fluffy. No, it was concentrated. And then with that zingy ginger and the zesty arugula, right, to help balance out and foil the rich, almost gelatinous risotto and rice. In this way, your stock is the height of thrift and extravagance. You've got to make stock in the kitchen. And when in doubt, just get it out and use it. You don't even have to know what you're going to do. do it. It is so nutritious, and it goes so far in the family kitchen, especially when your ingredients are few and super weird, and you don't know what else to do with them. Broth is the way to go. In case you needed any more encouragement in the making of broth, I was going to read a famous line about this because I think someone needs to do a study on this. And I am certain of it on a moral level, but not because I have actually done this research. But I would be willing to wager that the countries, the cultures that have endured the most famine have the most refined and delicious culinary traditions. It is the famine. It is the famine. One of the things you will find if you have broth in the kitchen is that you will become much more thrifty, right? Because you will start to make sauces. You might not be able to, help yourself. You might not be able to help yourself. You'll have to make sauces. If you fry meat or fry sausage, right? You're going to have brown little bits of meat sticking to the bottom of the pan. That's where you deglaze it. And I know deglazing and sounds very haute cuisine. It sounds very haughty French cookery, French chefy tall hat and lab coats. But it's not. It's incredibly thrifty. But it is also really fancy because it's super delicious. And broth is what you need to make really good sauces. And so what you do to deglaze a pan is after you've removed the meat, you have those little crispy bits stuck to the bottom. You got to slosh in something with a little bit of acid to cut it. And that could be wine. It could be just a little bit of vinegar. It could be water with a little bit of vinegar. It could just be water, even though, it doesn't have any acid. It'll still usually pull it up, just a little bit. Beer you could use. If I have any coffee in the pot behind me, I'll throw in a little bit of coffee. It's got a little bit of acidity to it. And what that acidity does is it helps scrape up and clean your cast iron pan of the sticky bits. And then you stir and scrape the bottom so that those bits of charred and browned meat are suspended in the boiling, reducing acid liquid that you poured in there. And then you tip in some broth and you let that reduce while you are carving the meat, let's say. And then by the time you're done, go over there and taste the reducing broth that has been boiling away. And then you can flavor it. Have fun, right? If you want it to be a little more tangy, add a little splash of vinegar. If you want to counter that tang with some sweetness, sprinkle in some brown sugar or a little bit of honey. If you want it to be, to get a pleasant, piquant flavor to it and thicken it even more than it already is, add a little mustard. And then if you really want it to get delicious and blandly cheesy in a good way, in the good sense of bland, add heavy cream and let that reduce. Absolutely delicious. No flour needed. No thickening with flour required. And then you pour that. You adorn the meat with that. Absolutely delicious. But you see how that is also thrifty. You are eating the charred little remains of your precious pork chop that's stuck to the pan. You're not even wasting those, and you're cleaning the pan at the same time. That is thrift and extravagance in equal measure. And it's made possible because you have good broth. That is really the thickening and enriching agent. You could also poach all your vegetables in broth before you cook them in any other way. Just literally boil them in homemade broth. And then just enough to barely soften them. I don't care what it is. Broccoli, asparagus, any vegetable. And then even diced up eggplant you could do this with. And then blast it in a hot oven or char it hot and fast in some hot butter on a skillet. Or don't. Just poach it in broth and then salt it and serve. If it's good, homegrown, fresh veg, that will be delicious. And then you can keep reusing the broth. right? You just keep reheating it, which keeps sterilizing it, and you keep it in the kitchen. And you use it over and over, and then eventually commit it to the risotto. Or the polenta, another thing, corn grits, cornmeal that you can cook in broth that turns an otherwise carb-heavy meal into something with tons of collagen and richness and nutrients. So, Escoffier, the essence of haute cuisine, French cookery, right? This guy had an army of cooks and wrote this book on cookery. It is incredibly full. It's incredibly fun. It's a little ridiculous sometimes. He had lots of time on his hands to do some crazy things like clarifying stock. And it's crazy. If you've ever done it, it involves egg whites and ground beef. It's incredibly complicated, but also incredibly delicious. Probably don't have time for it. I definitely don't. But when I have done it, it's amazing. But he says, from the heights of haute cuisine, this guy kind of started it, that stock is essential. This is what he says. Before undertaking the description of the different kinds of dishes whose recipes I intend to giving in this work, it will be necessary to reveal the groundwork whereon these recipes are built. And although this has already been done again and again and is wearisome in the extreme, a textbook on cooking that did not include it would not be only incomplete, but in many cases incomprehensible. Notwithstanding the fact that it is the usual procedure in culinary matters to insist upon the importance of the part played by stock, I feel compelled to refer to it at the outset of this work and to lay even further stress upon what has already been written on the subject. Indeed, stock is everything in cooking, at least in French cooking. Without it, nothing can be done. If one's stock is good, what remains of the work is easy. If, on the other hand, it is bad or merely mediocre, it is quite hopeless to expect anything approaching a satisfactory result. I beseech you, make bone broth. It is the height of thrift and extravagance in the home kitchen. And it will take some time. It is a sacrifice of time because the way that you make broth well, broth or stock, again, I'm using them interchangeably, is by taking time. So you don't boil it. What you do is you fill your pot with as many bones as you can fit. You could roast them in the oven first to get them brown if you want, but you don't have to. That's just a matter of taste. It's delicious both ways. I usually don't because that's just another big step that I tend to not have a lot of time for, and usually I'm doing an obscene quantity of bones on account of my work. So fill your biggest pot with as many bones as can fit, and all bones from all creatures are acceptable. And then you fill it with water, and then I like to put the mirepoix, the vegetables, and it could be any vegetables, really. The traditional vegetable trinity is going to be the carrots, onions, and celery, and that works. I frequently don't have celery, but I make it anyway. And if I didn't have any vegetables, not even peelings from like broccoli stems, I would still make it. Onion is pretty good, and if you have it, bay leaf is nice to put in there. And you don't need to chop up the vegetables. You can, but it's kind of a pain. Just have the onions, plop them in there. Leave the carrots whole. Plop them in there. Break the celery sticks just at least so that they fit in the pot, and plop them in there. And then submerge everything in water. And you want a couple inches of water on the top because you're going to skim. So you want, I would say, ideally 2.5 to 3 inches of water above the level of the bones. Turn on the heat on max, but don't leave. Watch it. The rule for making good bone broth is never boil and always skim. Do simmer and do skim. So with the pot on high heat, it's going to threaten to boil eventually. And when you see that surface trembling, the surface of the water, threatening to start throwing up brazen, speedy bubbles, turn the heat all the way down to its lowest degree, to the simmer. And then don't leave. Watch it to make sure it doesn't simmer. If you turn it all the way down, it probably won't. But what that does is it makes all of the blood that is still present in the bone and in the meat on the bone coagulate. Because blood has albumin, like eggs do. And when it's heated to a certain temperature, it solidifies. And as it solidifies, it slowly rises, solidifying, capturing in the broth, as it solidifies, particles. So dirt, grime, whatever, impurities, they're all captured in the rising, floating, solidifying albumin protein from the blood. And then it will settle on the surface. It precipitates to the top and creates a gray foam. That foam does not taste nice. It is bitter. And so you skim it off. And you might only have to do that twice when you see the gray bubbles on top. It's usually right after you've locked in the simmer. And then just let it go. And I'm making broth for flavor and richness. And so I do not know how long I let the broth simmer. I don't really care. A long time. Sometimes it's a day and a night. Sometimes it's 6 hours. The key is to make broth. Don't wed yourself to the idea that you can't make broth and that it's not worth your time if you can't simmer it for 36 hours. That's ridiculous. Not necessary. It's fine. But if you have some broader denuded bones in the broth will become bitter because it will actually start to unknit the bones and they will turn into a powder. And that doesn't taste so nice. So just simmer it as long as you can. But again, I don't go beyond 24 hours. That's silly. And I know health experts and foodies are I should say, probably not foodies, but, CrossFit gurus that are making their broth for the sole end of collagen will disagree with me. But that's not my end. My end is a higher one, and that is flavor, which I dare say, given the vagary of nutritional science, usually turns out to be the truest thing as far as nutrition goes. Traditionally, look at the traditional recipes and follow your taste buds. If it tastes well and your taste buds aren't malformed, inevitably the food science will come around and agree with you and vindicate your taste buds. That's what I find, because food science is probably the most fickle thing. It changes every year. It's ridiculous. But you know what doesn't is what tastes well. That stays the same. And it's semi-authoritative. Or no, it is. It is. Because that is a well-ordered proximate end. And so skim that broth, remove the foam, dispose of it. Don't ever let it do the rolling boil. That will scald the fat and it will plunge that floating albumin flotilla down again, and it will burn it. It's actually kind of like burnt egg. That's really what it is. It's like burnt egg, which doesn't taste good. It's bitter. It will make your stock a little subtly bitter. Whereas if you never let it boil, but only simmer and skim it, it will be full-bodied. It will be delicious. It will be rich. It will be sweet. You could drink it on its own. It'll be so flavorful. And do avoid the boil. And what I mean by that is that it should just be a tremulous surface. You should just see one bubble coming up every once in a while. Bloop, bloop, maybe one little spot that's fluttering, but nothing more than that. You don't want the rolling boil. Avoid that. Simmer. And that is survival food, but it's also extremely delightful and delicious, which makes survival easier because that's how pleasure works. The pleasure of the table. Well, thank you everyone for hanging with me for this incredibly long podcast. It's fun for me to bring these thoughts together, but it will be even more fun and indeed probably more worth your time when I get guests on. We do have a guest slated. I'm very excited about it. There's a book coming out where Catholics again are exploring agrarianism, the possibility of farming in community, and what that might look like for Catholics, what it has looked like in the past, but what it looks like for Catholics in the modern context, for humans, really. It'll have broad-reaching explorations, and I get the pleasure of interviewing one of the authors that contributed to it in a couple weeks. So I look forward to that interview, and we'll get more going here. Do check out farmsteadmeatsmith.com. Come to a family pig class. Stay up to date in the upcoming classes tab where you can find any of the classes that I have posted. I hope to post more soon. I just have to plan a few things. It takes a lot of planning to do a class, because you got to grow an animal, and that takes time. And so we will have more classes coming in the future. Check out the Farmstead Meatsmith membership on farmsteadmeatsmith.com, where we can do live chats like this with our Meatsmith members. We do them regularly. And this is where the Meatsmith members can participate by submitting questions or comments, and I can answer harvesting questions, farming questions, curing questions in real time. So it's a lot of fun. Do check that out. In any case, thank you for joining me as I wax eloquent, I hope it's somewhat eloquent, about the benignity of limiting oneself and how that limitation is really the key to delight in the table, at the family table, and to the process that leads to that consummation at the family table. Limiting ourselves to simple tools, because at the end, they are more becoming. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.